So as promised, we are going to get you up and moving a little bit, so push your chairs back and stand up for a second. We'll wait. So during this session, we're going to be asking you to stand up and sit down a bit. So go ahead and sit back down. You know that you've got enough space to be able to stand up. This morning, you've had an incredible opportunity to hear from some of your peers about what getting to success and what success looks like in very different schools. You've had the opportunity to hear a bit about belonging, and after our session, you'll have an opportunity to see how your professional vision makes this work possible. For this session, we're going to ask you to be a little bit vulnerable. We've closed the doors. What happens in the next 40 minutes stays in this room. Some of the vulnerability is around talking and thinking and feeling about what it means to do equity work. And so we're going to use student voice during this next session. And we've asked some of our colleagues from Montgomery County Public Schools, Scott and Brian, to help us to give voice to our students. So what we'll be doing is we'll have them read a quote from our students, and then they will have a little bit of time to reflect on how that quote in different ways has made them feel, make them think about, and help them to see equity on their personal equity journey. And we'll ask you with various prompts to stand if those quotes and those experiences resonate with you. So standing with your colleagues, standing on behalf of your students, standing for your own personal journey. When I was director of equity in a school district just south of Seattle, one of the mantras that came very popular in our work was that you needed to show up, which you've all done today, despite the fact that your schools do not stop, even when you step out of the building. You need to stand up for the things that you believe in, and you need to speak up for the things you believe in. So we'll have an opportunity for some of you in the room to share with the broader room what your thoughts, what your feelings, what your experiences have been. But we encourage this to just be the beginning. On your tables, you have handouts that will become most useful once you leave today. There are spaces to act as reflective prompts when you are thinking back at your school about what is this situation that's happening for me, and some questions that you can ask yourself on your journey to get you further along, if not unstuck in certain areas. So without further ado, what I'm going to ask is for Brian, Director of High Schools Support and Improvement for Montgomery County Public Schools, to please rise and do us the honor of reading our very first quote from a student.
I figure out whatever it takes to get good grades. If I don't understand something, I would see teachers during lunch or after school in order to understand it. I check my grades frequently, and I try to make sure they stay high. During the last few years of high school, I procrastinated too much, and I learned to overcome that. One thing I wish my teachers knew about me is that I prefer one-on-one teaching, and this is a male 11th grade AP candidate. So the second part of my charge was to kind of unpack that a little bit and speak to what resonates with me and how it relates to my work. So first and foremost, whenever you hear a story, right, you put it in context of your own personal life, your own personal journey. So I'm a native from Philadelphia, lived in West Oak Lane, which was an all African-American neighborhood, but had the opportunity of going to a Quaker private school, which was not in the neighborhood. So needless to say, my journeys from the bus to home were long every day because I did not fit. I was viewed as an outsider, and that was a constant struggle for me. When we moved out of Philadelphia to the outskirts, Cheltenham, went to Cheltenham High School, which was a predominantly white/Jewish school, 10% African-American students at the best. I excelled in athletics, but not in academics. I never had one teacher in my whole high school career ever reach out and try to encourage or pull out the potential in me. Subsequently, I was a D1 prospect, but did not have a 2.0 GPA coming out of high school. Did extremely well on the SAT. I remember University of Delaware being the last college sitting around the table with my parents saying that they would love to have you, but without meeting that clearinghouse criteria of that 2.0, there was nothing that they can do. Remember the tears of my mother vividly. So that's what pushes me and the work that I do as a director of high schools. So 3 high school directors in Montgomery County. I supervise around 10 high schools in the up-county portion of Montgomery County. And our main job is to coach, support, and evaluate those high school principals through their journey. So what really resonates is that one-on-one. So you have opportunities to meet, coach, support principals within the context of their office and to really push them in terms of doing the equity work. But for me, where it really becomes paramount is how do you see that transferred between the 4 walls of the principal's office? So we have a lot of opportunities to have one-on-one conversations with administrators. We have opportunities to talk about the work that is happening in the counseling offices, the work that's happening with master schedules, the work that's happening on the leadership teams, and how is that transferring to what we say we stand for and represent as an equity leader. So you have a very highly motivated student here, one that perseveres, one that is reflective, one that understands their shortcomings and is willing to overcome those barriers that they create themselves. But if there's no one who reaches out, he says he prefers one-on-one. So obviously that's something that's missing in his day-to-day experience. The reflection and what really resonates is, as leaders of the work, how do we make sure that students such as this have someone, a trusted adult, that is reaching out, encouraging them, and trying to help them navigate. We heard a lot about stereotype threat. How do you navigate that mainstream as it relates to your own cultural life and experiences, and reach the potential that is potentially there for you? They cannot do it alone as students because life experiences have not afforded them all the answers. So I present that to the group. I shared a little of myself, just trying to be transparent and frame it, how it relates to me, and now I will turn it over to you in terms of how this resonates or relates to you in your own personal journey through the equity lens.
Thank you, Brian. So actually, what we would like you to do is, as you think about your equity journey, if there are moments where you have craved some one-on-one connection, some one-on-one insight to help you think about how to expand access or opportunity to students, will you please just stand? Maybe look around and see who or how many or what the room looks like that resonated with the students' words and with Brian's experience. Is there one person who maybe would just share 1 or 2 sentences about what that feels like or what that means to you?
We had a,
Thank you for standing, Dr. Larson.
always late, no. We had, oh, thank you, Bernadette. We had a, what do you call it, AP launch in the summer. We do a lot of different activities with the kids, so I sometimes attend them. And we had one instructor talk about it's okay to not feel like you belong. If you have that feeling, fake it. And just get in touch with that feeling. Say, there might be a few days I feel out of it, but I'm not going to pretend like I don't belong. I'm going to pretend like I know what's going on, and then I'm going to scramble, be scrappy, and get what I need. Go to the right people, get the support. So I just butted in, right? The students are looking like, who's this guy? And I explained my position, and I said, there's lots of times in my academic career where I faked it, and I gave some stories. And so we encouraged the teachers, when we kicked off the year, to tell their own stories where they didn't have it together, and they failed or struggled, and they kind of had to fake it. So I think the kids, when they see the teacher transparent telling those stories, this is a little tactic, but I think it really worked.
Thank you for demonstrating that. I invite you to have a seat. Thank you. We will now ask Scott Murphy, who is the Director of Secondary Curriculum and Districtwide Programs for Montgomery County Public Schools, and a colleague of Brian, to do us the honor of reading the next quote.
Okay, thank you. I think that my grades don't describe my capability to learn, because you might not have a good grade, but you probably know more than the test score says that you do. I wish my teachers knew that I'm a hardworking person, but they just need to have a little more patience and be a little more helpful. From a female 10th grade AP candidate.
Thank you, Scott, for reading this young woman's words. For the room, if on your equity journey you have ever thought that a little more patience or a little more help would have resulted in stronger equity results in your system as you sought to expand access to opportunity for students, please stand up. Scott, would you share with us your reflections on the meaning of patience on the equity journey?
So actually, when I think about patience, and I think about our equity work as school leaders and as district leaders, I actually think it's a double-edged sword. And patience can actually be a slippery slope. Sometimes I worry that patience can sometimes be misconstrued as low expectations. For example, could "I'll give you a little more time on that assignment" be misinterpreted as "the teacher didn't expect me to turn it in on time in the first place"? So I believe we have to be very, very careful about mixing patience with some high expectations. Mixing patience with some level of demandingness and some insistence that as we work with students and show our patience, that it's also with a message of high expectations. Same thing with a little more help that this student talked about. A little more help could also be misconstrued as a soft message of low expectations. For example, my teachers used to say all the time, "I'm available during lunch." I offer help after school. But I believe it's really important that we move from offering to insisting. I'm offering this extra help after school, and I expect to see you at 3 o'clock or else, with some level of demandingness and insistence. As we work with students, we show our care, we show our support. So in our journey, we talk a lot about patience and extra help, but we also talk about what we call a pedagogy of insistence. That we're not going to let students hide, we're not going to let them off the hook. We care very much about them, but we're also going to be insistent and demanding as we work with them each and every day. We also talk about, interestingly enough, lessons learned from the medical field. The term we've used is borrowed from medicine and psychology when working with students. Unconditional positive regard. It's what a nurse does. Doesn't matter what that patient says or does, or what body fluids come out, but what happens the next morning? Good morning, I'm happy to see you, and I care about you, and we're going to get this done. And so we bring that lessons learned from medicine, from psychology to our students, and make sure not only are we showing that unconditional positive regard with patience and care and concern, but with high expectation and insistence that they meet our expectations.
Thank you for sharing, Scott. Is there one other person in the room who would like to share their story of how they perceive patience on their equity journey? If you'd raise your hand, we can run a microphone over to you. Dr. Wallace.
And I'm speaking from a personal perspective, not even as a superintendent. I really struggle with adults that don't push students a little harder. I think that's patience. Being able to help through the adult being patient with students and helping them through that anxiety or that reluctance or that apathy, whatever it is that our students have, being able to help them through it. I have a self-appointed goddaughter that decided that she was going to drop her AP class. And it really was just because she didn't want to do the work. Because she's very social, very beautiful, and she stays on her cell phone till 1 or 2 in the morning. And so I was disappointed because it happened before I could get to work. And so then we had a conversation, and she literally said I could do the work, but she had made the choice not to. And Marquise heard a teacher actually say in response to my concerns that we push students to stay and get through it, well, that's not being student-centered. So that teacher's interpretation of student-centered was that you allow students to drop if they say they want to drop. And so to me, that is not being student-centered when you have teenagers that may not always think about their life beyond today. And so I think that teachers need to have the patience to just get through just that teenage mentality of wanting to be social to support them into where they have the capacity and the gift to be. And I don't think they have the patience to work through how difficult it would be for us as adults.
Thank you so much for sharing. Is there one other person who might want to share their interpretation of patience on their equity journey?
It makes me think of one of the early districts I worked with that is in one of the wealthiest zip codes in the U.S. and had a very high degree of stratification within the school system, and worked over a course of years with this system. And the notion was, well, we have to fix 8th and 9th grade first. Okay, let's wait a couple of years. Now we're there. Okay, now we have to tackle, what about all the supports and getting all the supports in place? We don't have the resources for that. So I went out and brought funders to the table. Well, what about the community and the board? They're going to push back on this, so I have a meeting with the board member and the superintendent. And the conversation goes on, and we go through this list, and we brought student insight cards, and I remember vividly this moment when there was a stack of insight cards, and the superintendent said, well, I can't, as a superintendent, I can't be expected to be responsible for the trajectory of this set of students or knowing who's who or where they are placed in this sort of thing. And as he was making his points, and he went on actually in this meeting with the board member and others for hours, talking and making his points, waved his hands dismissively over the student insight cards and over the face of a student named Juan, who he said, I can't take responsibility or account for that. And I grew in frustration over the course of this meeting, not having the patience, feeling that this fierce urgency of now in this context, and said, what can we do? We have 80% of your teachers in the survey saying that this should be addressed. We have hundreds of students with the insight cards on the table here in front of you. We've got funders to the table, your board members here. We've done everything we can. What more do you need in order to give this set of students the opportunities that they need and deserve? And he said, time. And his notion of patience, his notion of where things go reminded me of segregation and desegregation of schools. There's nothing more we could do other than have more time and more patience. And so that's the tough space of patience for me.
Thank you all for sharing. Please have a seat. At this time, I invite Alison to share her quote.
I'm a student that works a job, and I am a hardworking student. I am scared to ask for help. He's a female first-time AP student in 10th grade.
Thank you for reading this young woman's words, Allie. For the room, if on your equity journey you have seen fear impede progress, especially fear of asking for help, please stand up. Alison, would you share with us briefly a story of a time when you saw fear impede or propel your own equity journey?
You had to give me the hardest one.
Of course.
I taught in the South Bronx, and my students routinely on the way to school would be stopped by the NYPD under the stop and frisk policy and be asked to empty their book bags on the street to search for contraband, and would arrive late and frustrated and have folks yelling at them for being tardy, and have their book bag disorganized and have all the feelings they felt about being pushed up against a building and treated like a criminal, literally with a book bag on the way to school. And one hot summer, Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson and things started heating up. And you will remember that this all started becoming hotter, literally and figuratively, right before school started. So our staff, which was a majority white staff, sat down in a circle in the lunchroom, and we had a conversation about how we felt about what was happening and how to address it in our school and with our students. Because we felt deeply that we had a responsibility to, as educators and as advisors and as trusted adults, to create a community where students could talk about this. And the consensus in the room after a long sharing and discussion was that the majority white staff did not feel comfortable talking about race with mostly Black, Dominican, and Puerto Rican students. And I felt incredibly frustrated, and my response to that was to create this curriculum where I felt like it would empower my students to understand some of the nuances of what was going on historically and academically understand how this could happen in Ferguson and how does it relate to things that have happened in our history before. And I felt very self-congratulatory about this curriculum and this lesson and how I was equipping my students to have these conversations. But I wish I had said to those teachers, A, you have to have these conversations with these kids, these children who are walking into the school building believing that you are there to take care of them, that you have the answers, and that what you are teaching them is meaningful. I wish I'd had the courage to say that and to offer, if you don't know how to do that or you don't feel equipped, how can I support you? But I think I was fearful of that, and so I hid in the safety of my own classroom, and I wish I had done that differently.
Thank you so much for sharing, Alison. For those that are standing, is there anyone who has a story of how fear has propelled or impeded their equity journey that they would like to share?
I guess as an administrator from Charleston, South Carolina, knowing the history of our city, and as an educator, often seeing inequity in our district, and understanding the political climate, to be brave enough to speak out against those things without fear about what happens to your career has, I think, impacted my journey with trying to ensure that there is equity, not only in my school, but in our district. And I think I'm at the place in my life now where I understand that I have to be accountable for the greater good and not just for the fear of how it impacts you as a professional, but making sure that the next generation has what they need in order to be successful.
Thank you. How about another story? How fear has impeded or propelled your personal equity journey? I'm comfortable with silence.
I'll feel a sense of belonging if someone else is willing to share.
I'll do one. As a principal who started on this... Oh, no. And then I'll go after you.
Exactly.
As a principal who started on this journey 3 years ago with EOS, I'm going to give fear from a different perspective, which is a staff perspective. In a building of 1,000 students, we have many programs. And not all programs have AP classes for them. For example, we have a career and technical education, which has some dual credit, but it doesn't have AP. And those teachers were very fearful that by encouraging kids to go into AP classes, and maybe some of you have experienced this personally, that it pulls away from their students. But as we went through the journey and we explained to them, fear isn't about what's best for you. The focus is what's best for kids. And I had a music teacher who was very protective and an outstanding educator say to me one time in a meeting, and I never thought I would hear this from him, but it showed his opportunity to grow. As we were putting in a freshman AP course in human geography, I expected to hear him say, "No, we can't put that in, it'll take kids out of my class." And he said something very different. He said, "If this was here when my kids were in school, I would have wanted them to take it." And that's the culture that we need to cultivate within our districts, especially with some of those people who are fearful of change and resistance for some of our students.
Thank you for sharing.
So
So the question keeps throwing me off because I keep hearing your journey through equity. So I'm taking mine as very personal and internal in my journey in trying to become a more equitable person and being conscious of myself. And I think as a leader, then the fear I have is being vulnerable with my staff, which is something that all leaders need to do so that they too can feel okay with looking at themselves in the mirror. But as leaders of as a high school principal, you're also always afraid that that gets taken out of context. And so you always have to be very conscious of what you say. But I want my staff to confront those same fears. I want them to lean into that discomfort. So as I think about my staff and my building and just going through equity training, it's something I model for them, but it's something that I'm always scared to do every time because I don't know what those conversations are that occur in the parking lot or occurring on social media and everything else. And I want to make sure that what I'm saying is being interpreted properly.
Thank you for sharing. Go ahead and have a seat. Thank you all for standing with Alison. More than an opportunity to get up and increase your blood flow this morning in terms of standing up with others and on behalf of your own journey, this was an invitation to experience equity through your students' words, through their perseverance, their patience, their dreams and their fears. You can see, feel, and imagine their potential. You can reflect on how you hold the power of access and opportunity for students throughout your districts and throughout your schools. Our invitation to you, as you return to your district, is to continue to stand reflectively in your power. Those forms on your table are just some prompts that can help you tack it up on your wall, put it in your favorite portfolio that you carry along with you, take a photo if you're a phone person, and pull it up on your phone from now and again. When you come across those moments, as our first panel discussed around those moments of when you get a staff is pushing back, or when the board member wants to have the conversation, or when the parent is saying this is too much, start to reflect on those words that those students had and how they impact your own journey. Use some of those questions to get a little bit deeper with yourself personally around how your journey can be impacted by the impact that you're having on students. Thank you so much for being brave and willing to stand up, to show up to begin with, but to stand up with one another, and particularly to those of you who shared vulnerably in this room with people who are kind of still strangers to you, how this work has impacted your personal journey. Thank you for your time this morning.